Hello everybody and welcome to the Serverless Workflow Hands-on video number 3. In this video we'll take a look at compensation. We will describe what it is and then we will see how we can apply it to our new patient onboarding workflow that we've been working on in the videos 1 and 2. If you haven't seen those yet, make sure to check them out. I'll put a link to both in the video description below. So compensation has to deal with undoing or reversing work which has already successfully been completed. A typical example is, a customer canceling a purchase, already made purchase, and we want to be able to compensate that. In case of our demo, we will take a look at how we can compensate a patient declining or canceling the scheduled appointment with a doctor or completely the whole entire onboarding process by wanting to, for example, get treatment somewhere else. Now, compensation is not a strict undo, and it can involve multiple logical steps. And the best way to describe that is, for example, going back to the customer making a purchase, is our workflow sending them a purchase confirmation email. If later on this customer cancels the purchase, we cannot simply undo the email that we have sent already. And our compensation then can deal with multiple steps. For example, the first step, sending another email to the customer with the cancellation information, and then maybe later on sending him further emails with maybe some information about items in our inventory that are for sale or something like that. Triggering compensation is really part of the business logic. So in the last video, we talked about error handling, and error handling are dynamically created during execution of a state or the entire workflow. With compensation, it is not reactive. We have to define, and when in our workflow model, when compensation should be triggered. And it really is part of the actual business logic. So whenever you're using workflows to express and your business logic with, you should think about compensation as well. So Serverless Workflow provides a simple but very powerful support for compensation. And we will take a look at that as part of our demo. So let's take a look at compensation and describe it a little bit further. The first thing we're going to look at is explicit compensation, meaning that we really want to be able to describe, in this case, compensation as part of the control flow logic. And if we see on top, we have a very simple process. It's just like a pipeline. We have states A and B, which are executed sequentially, one after another. If you wanted to add compensation before we end the workflow execution, we could simply do that by adding to a workflow model a state, let's say B1, which can compensate the execution of B, and then add after that a state A1, which knows is the compensation for the work done by state A. And this looks very simple. However, when we deal again with explicit compensation, it becomes very complex very fast. As soon as we go beyond the simple pipeline type of one path processes, and we see on the top the image of our workflow, now our workflow has two paths. It can either go A, B, D, E during workflow execution, or we can take the second path, which is A, C, D, E as well. So if we try to define the compensation already in our model itself, we would have to, start off again. We can compensate the execution of state E with E1, D with D1, but then we have a problem. Because in our model definition themselves, we really do not know if during the execution of this workflow is going to take the path A, B, D, E, or A, C, D, E. And we said compensation only works on work that has already been done. So we don't know really whether or not we should perform compensation state B1, which compensates state B, or C1. And a lot of times it is impossible even to infer that just looking at the model itself. Maybe in some cases we can do, depending, looking at some data or making some database decisions, but a lot of times it's simply impossible. So compensation can become very complex to implement if we want to look at it simply from the explicit modeling in the workflow itself. So compensation in serverless workflow is done implicit. Instead of forcing users to model their compensation implicitly during the workflow, we give them construct. We provide constructs which make this really, really easy. If we look at, the image in the top left corner, we see that we simply define for state B, we say it is compensated by states B1 and B2. And we only see state D is compensated by D1, and state C is compensated by C1. So let's, and serverless workflow really utilizes depends on the runtime implementations to do two things. Number one is to be able to track which states have been executed so far. And number two, from these directives, like we show in the top left corner, be able to infer during compensation which of these compensation states have to be executed depending on which path of execution the workflow has been taken so far before compensation was triggered. So if we see in the bottom right corner, in the states with the red border, let's say, are the states that were actually executed during workflow execution. So if we have taken a path A, B, D, E in this case. So after E, we triggered our compensation. So if we look at the way we've defined our compensation in the picture on the top left side, we see the state E does not have a compensated by state, so there is nothing to be compensated. State D, which was executed and already performed, has a compensated by state D1, so that would be performed next. State B, which has a red border, which means it was executed so far, has a compensated by states B1 and B2, which then would be performed during compensation. State C, as you can see, was never actually performed, so even though it defines a compensated by state, we wouldn't execute that state during compensation. And then our state A does not define a compensated by, so there is nothing to do here. And so this really scales for both the small type of simple processes as well as very complex processes. And we'll take a look at how we can do that in our patient onboarding workflow. So the last slide I want to show is just how compensation now fits in our new patient onboarding workflow. So what we want to do now is add compensation or perform compensation whenever our patient, after we've onboarded him, after some time, decides to cancel the scheduled appointment or completely cancel the onboarding by saying they want to get treated somewhere else. So that is kind of what we're looking for doing in our demo now. So let's now go to VS Code. So this is our patient onboarding workflow, which we have been working on in the previous two hands-on videos. So again, make sure you check those out. So let's take a look, and added a little bit to it just for our use case here. So let's take a look at the visualization. We still have the starting event state, our onboard state, which is here, which waits for a new onboarding event. This is a cloud event that from our UI is being pushed to our MQTT message topic, and then starts a workflow instance. In the last video, we added error handling and retry definition or recovery to this particular state, and saw how that works. For compensation, we've added a little bit extra to this workflow, meaning after the onboarding is performed, we come to a switch state, and this is here. In serverless workflow, a switch state can make decisions, control flow logic decisions based either on workflow data or events. So in this case, we have a switch state which makes control flow decisions or where to transition to based on events. Meaning that after onboarding is done, we give, for sake of our demo, the patient 5 minutes to make a final decision whether they want to approve or they approve this particular doctor and the appointment that our workflow has scheduled for them, or they want to deny it completely. In case of deny, which is here, patient cancels our onboarding, at this point we want to actually do our compensation. We also see on top a little do abort state is just dangling on top right corner of the image. This particular state knows how to compensate our onboarding state. So whenever we trigger compensation, we come here and we don't need to compensate the decision state. However, if our onboarding state was successfully performed during compensation, we do want to compensate it with a do abort state. So let's see how we can actually add the compensation constructs to our workflow. The first thing we want to do is go to our onboarding state here and add simply compensated by, and now we want to add the state that actually compensates our onboarding state, in which case is our do abort state. So what we're saying now basically is their onboarding state. If we trigger compensation and this onboarding state was already successfully executed, we want compensation to trigger our do abort state, which then can compensate all the work that has done here. The second thing we want to do, we want to go to our do abort state, and we want to flag it with used for compensation and set that to true. What that means is that we're flagging the state that saying that it is not really part of our main control flow logic here. However, it is a state that is only used, can be used during compensation. So this helps like runtime implementations and can also help with the workflow validation and linters and things like that to flag this error. If we are trying from our main control flow logic states to transition to this do abort state, it should be flagged with saying no, this state is only able to be executed during compensation. It should not be transitioned to during from our main control flow logic states. So now that we have defined that, we actually, if we remember from previous slides, compensation has to be triggered by our business logic. And when do we want to trigger compensation? Well, it's basically here, whenever a patient cancels our onboarding. So we go back to our switch state here. We see the two conditions. The patient approves, which is this one, in which case we just want to update our patient information in our database and end workflow execution. And here is the other condition, patient cancels, which just links to a workflow end definition. So what we want to do basically say here is say compensate and set it to true. And what that will tell the workflow runtime is basically that before ending our workflow execution, so coming here for this condition here, we want to trigger compensation. And that's really it. So let's take a look at actually executing this workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start our application that executes our workflow. I should just start in a second. All right, so our application has started. So let's go ahead and see the demo UI. Here we can quickly type in the name of the patient and some sort of condition he might have. This will trigger a workflow execution. So let's go ahead and see this. John was onboarded, assigned a doctor. Let's see, John right away confirms. So if we see, press the confirm button. Now what happens is we have confirmed this patient. We send the onboarding approval event. Now workflow is completed execution. Let's say we have also Mary who might have headaches. So let's go ahead and do that. So we see Mary, and let's say she says, no thanks, I don't want this assigned doctor or the appointment. So we can go and abort. As you can see, Mary declined the onboarding. So we went ahead and triggered the workflow compensation. And at that point, we compensated our onboarding with our do abort state, and we ended workflow execution. So this is it for the demo. I hope you guys liked it. This is the end of our new patient demo. The next videos will include different types of demos and things that we're going to look at. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys. See you all in the next Serverless Workflow hands-on video. Thanks.